connect a region of over 600 cultural bridges between our lands.
Hello, I am Crystal Mapa from Bangkok, Thailand, and welcome to ASEAN in Focus. On today's headlines, Chinese President Xi Jinping in Bangkok, Thailand said that the Asia-Pacific is no one's backyard and should not become an arena for a big power contest. President Bongbong Marcos on Thursday, November 17th, met with Chinese President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the 9th Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Leaders meeting.
Because we are fighting against
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Thursday he was not fully sure what led a missile to fall on a Polish village near the Ukrainian border after laying blame on Russia. A former British envoy, an Australian economic advisor, and a Japanese journalist flew to Thailand late Thursday after being freed by Myanmar's junta in an amnesty releasing almost 6,000 prisoners. First in our news, Chinese President Xi Jinping here in Bangkok, Thailand said that the Asia-Pacific is no one's backyard and should not become an arena for a big power contest. Organizers said Xi made the remarks in a written speech for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation or APEC CEO Summit on Thursday. He had been due to give an address to the business forum, but then cancelled. No attempt to wage a new Cold War will ever be allowed by the people or by our times, she said in written remarks prepared for a business event linked to the summit. We should follow a path of openness and inclusiveness, adding the region should not turn into an arena for big power contest. Relations between the world's two largest economies have grown strained in recent years over issues including tariffs, Taiwan intellectual property theft, the removal of Hong Kong's autonomy, and territorial disputes over the South China Sea, among others. In a move that may be seen by Beijing as a rebuke, a senior administration official said the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris will on Tuesday visit the Philippine islands of Palawan on the edge of the disputed South China Sea. She told Philippine counterpart Ferdinand Marcos Jr. at a meeting in Bangkok that the strength of bilateral ties hinged on stable relations at sea, China's CCTV state broadcaster said, referring to disputes over areas of the South China Sea. The trip will make Harris the highest-ranking U.S. official to visit the island chain adjacent to the Spratly Islands. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, and President of China Xi Jinping arrived for the summit here in Bangkok, Thailand. The gathering follows a meeting of the G20 in Indonesia that was upended by fears that a deadly missile strike on Poland signaled a dangerous escalation of Russia's war in Ukraine. Chinese President Xi Jinping will arrive in Bangkok later Thursday, days after a landmark summit with Biden in Bali. The superpower pair tried to take the heat out of their rivalry, which has intensified sharply in recent years as Beijing has become more powerful and more assertive about replacing the U.S.-led order that has prevailed since World War II. They emerged from 3 hours of talks on Monday, declaring need not be a new Cold War, speaking of their desire to prevent tensions from spilling into conflict. The APEC Summit caps an intense fortnight of diplomacy in Asia, following the G20 and a gathering of Association of Southeast Asian Nations leaders in Phnom Penh last week. President Bongbong Marcos on Thursday, November 17, met with Chinese President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the 9th Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation or APEC Leaders meeting. According to the Office of the Press Secretary, the two leaders discussed strengthening and expanding the Philippines-China relationship. The statement said this was particularly in the areas of agriculture, energy, infrastructure, and people-to-people connections. President Xi told Philippine counterpart that the strength of bilateral ties hinge on stable relations at sea, China's CCTV state broadcaster said, referring to disputes over areas of the South China Sea. During the ASEAN summit in Phnom Penh last week, the president called for the finalization of a code of conduct in the West Philippine Sea to ensure stability in the region. In 2016, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague, Netherlands, ruled in favor of the Philippines after it declared Beijing's claim over the South China Sea is illegal. President Marcos, attending the APEC CEO Summit, says structural changes and innovations should be encouraged to accelerate growth and in terms of accelerating efforts against global problems. Let's listen in.
In the long term, there really are, I agree with Mr. Moritz, the changes that need to be made are structural. They have to be done structurally because this is a different world, this is a different economy. And as we were discussing in the green room, he says, we're not playing catch-up. And I said, even if you were, what are we trying to catch up to, 2019? I don't think that that's the plan. And so we have to be, we cannot be too married to the ideas that we were holding as truths before. And we have to be willing to make big changes, but with recognition that from what is actually happening around the world. But when we make these structural changes, I like to pick up on the point that Dr. Schwab made, is innovation. We must allow still innovation we must still continue to encourage innovation and to recognize innovations that can actually help and immediately put them into play, or put that, if it's a product, to market, or if it's a system, to implement that system. So the agility that Mr. Moritz is saying, I think, is the key to the future in the long term for not only the ASEAN, Asia-Pacific region, Indo-Pacific region, but for the whole world.
Meanwhile, President Marcos also praised the APEC economies for being able to manage the balance between cooperation and competition, and said that this is key for the growth of the region. Let's continue to listen in.
I think one of the great advantages that that APEC and the countries in the Indo-Pacific, Asia-Pacific region have been able to manage is that very difficult balance between cooperation and competition. And yet we seem to, for the most part, I would say we have done it. And that is what has driven the growth of the region, is that we are able to compete with one another. But when we find opportunities where partnerships will give the better result, we are all perfectly willing to enter into those partnerships as well. So that, I think, is going to be key. We have done it before. It is the nature of APEC. If we continue to do that and strengthen that, I think it will be to the great benefit of all countries.
Ministers from the 21 APEC member economies convened in person here in Bangkok for the first time since 2018 against the backdrop of increasing inflation, food and energy prices, inequality, and climate change. Together, ministers are aligning their ideas for advancing Asia-Pacific integration, trade, and investment in the common pursuit of a sustained and inclusive recovery in a highly uncertain world. Let's listen in.
APEC meeting this year takes place amidst a dual jeopardy. we need not be reminded of the severe security conflicts that know not what victory looks like. Meanwhile, the world is staring at the hyperinflation married to recession, broken supply chain and scarcity, and climate calamities.
Deputy Prime Minister Don highlighted the positive progress of the Bangkok goals on the BCG economy, which will be presented to APEC leaders. The objectives are aimed at advancing and integrating APEC's sustainability agenda into the mainstream. In his remarks, Deputy Prime Minister Jurin, who was also the chair of the 2022 APEC ministers responsible for trade meeting in May, highlighted the progress made on the multi-year work plan on the free trade area of the Asia-Pacific, noting that deepening the region's integration is key to addressing economic uncertainties. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says that Russia bears ultimate responsibility for a deadly blast in Poland, where an initial probe blamed Ukrainian air defenses during his media address at APEC Summit here in Bangkok. Let's watch this.
I think you've heard us say that we've seen nothing so far that contradicts President Duda's preliminary assessment that this was likely the result of a Ukrainian air defense missile that unfortunately landed in Poland. But we'll continue to assess and share the new information. Whatever its final conclusion, we already know the party ultimately responsible for this tragic incident, Russia. Ukraine has a right to defend itself, and we're committed to supporting Ukraine in every effort it's making to defend itself.
Separately, Blinken praised UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and Turkey for their diplomacy to extend a deal to give safe passage to Ukrainian grain out of the Black Sea. Blinken called the deal a vital lifeline for the developing world, where prices for food imports skyrocketed following Russia's February 24 invasion of Ukraine, a top exporter of wheat and other grains. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Thursday he was not fully sure what led a missile to fall on a Polish village near the Ukrainian border after laying blame on Russia. Zelensky previously insisted that the rocket was not Ukrainian and wanted evidence if Ukraine's air defense was responsible. Let's watch this.
Thank you for this question. First of all, everyone has to understand that there were about 100 missiles that were launched on that day. And I'm grateful for the world for the support of Ukraine with air defense and anti-missile defense. But nevertheless, you can see what are the consequences and aftermath of the Russian war. This is not the first time that the whole missile, a piece of missile of Russia falls down on the territory of another country. Some time ago, the same thing happened. The pieces of the Russian missiles fell on the territory of Moldova, and it was aiming at Ukrainian territory. I don't know what happened this time. We don't know 100%. I think the world also doesn't know what happened 100% in that situation. But I'm sure that this is a Russian missile, and I'm sure that we were launching the air defense missiles, but we can't say specifically that this was the air defense of Ukraine, although we are grateful for not being blamed because we are fighting against Russian missiles on our territory. But
Ukrainian experts have arrived in Poland as part of an investigation to determine whether a missile that killed 2 people was fired from Western leaders moved to calm fears of a dangerous escalation in Russia's war in Ukraine on Wednesday, saying the missile blast in Poland was likely an accident. Kyiv pushed back hard at the idea that its anti-aircraft fire was to blame. Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky pointed the finger at Russia, But the United States, like NATO, firmly supported Warsaw's assessment that the deadly missile was probably fired by Ukraine. Polish President Andrzej Duda called it an unfortunate accident, saying that while the projectile likely originated from Ukraine's air defenses, the blame lay with Russia because of its attacks. From Bali, where the G20 summit was held, U.S. President Joe Biden said it was unlikely that the missile had been fired by Russia. Moscow welcomed Washington's restraint. Article 5 of the NATO Alliance Treaty basically says that if one member is attacked, then all of the other members will treat it as an attack on them all. In effect, it calls for a collective response once requested by any of the current 30 members of NATO and invoked by the entire alliance. North Korea fired a suspected intercontinental ballistic missile Friday. Seoul's military said its second launch in 2 days, which Japan said had splashed down in its exclusive economic zone. Seoul's Joint Chiefs of Staff said it had detected a presumed long-range ballistic missile around 10:15 fired from the Sunan area in Pyongyang towards the East Sea, referring to the body of water also known as the Sea of Japan. The presidential office said South Korea's National Security Council met Friday to discuss the presumed ICBM launch. Seoul-based specialist site NK News reported that photos and videos taken from Pyongyang showed a white contrail in the sky that was visible from the city. The launch comes a day after North Korea fired a short-range ballistic missile as its Minister of Foreign Affairs, Cho Son-hui, warned Pyongyang would take fiercer military action if the United States strengthened its extended deterrence commitment to regional allies. Experts say North Korea is seizing the opportunity to conduct banned missile tests, confident of escaping further UN sanctions due to Ukraine-linked gridlock at the United Nations. Meanwhile, Tokyo also confirmed the launch, with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida saying it was believed to have fallen in waters within the country's exclusive economic zone of the northern region of Hokkaido. Let's listen in.
本日、北朝鮮が弾道ミサイルを発射し、北海道の西側の我が国 EEZ 内に着弾したものと思われます。北朝鮮はこれまでにない頻度で挑発行動を繰り返しています。断じて容認することができないということを改めて強く申し上げます。
On Thursday evening, Kishida said he had expressed serious concerns to Chinese President Xi Jinping on security issues, including North Korea, after the two leaders held their first face-to-face talks. Xi flew to the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, forum here in Bangkok from a G20 summit in Bali, where U.S. President Joe Biden also pushed him to use his influence to rein in North Korea's activities. China is Pyongyang's main diplomatic and economic ally, and in May, it joined Russia in vetoing a U.S.-led bid at the UN Security Council to tighten sanctions on North Korea. The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC Business Advisory Council, or ABAC, has urged APEC leaders to develop a plan to address three urgent economic issues: inflation, food and energy security, and climate change. Let's listen in.
This is the context of the APEC member will seek to convey a strong message to the APEC leaders later this week, emphasizing the crucial need for the collective leadership and decisive action to accelerate economic recovery and secure long-term prospects for growth. This, as the world continues to grapple with the range of the urgent and interrelative challenge, including of the continuing pandemic, geopolitical conflicts, rising inflation, food and energy insecurity, and imminent threat of the climate change and ongoing supply chain disruption. APEC has proposed a range of the action to deepen economic integration, including supporting a strong and more relevant WTO and accelerating the journey toward the free trade area of the Asia-Pacific through a structured work program that would deliver tangible benefits for businesses in the short to medium term.
Second is supporting the World Trade Organization and advocating for a rule-based multilateral trading system. Third is on services, trade and investment. And the fourth area on reopening borders for safe and seamless travel.
64% of SMEs in Southeast Asia, 71% in Thailand, quickly moved to digitize to maintain their businesses through the pandemic. And while that was important for business continuity, it came with a number of risks because the challenge is we don't have baseline foundations to enable the digital economy in place across APEC. So the work of the Digital Working Group this year focused on understanding our state of play in terms of those important foundations.
Keeping inflation under control, of course, is the most imminent issue to be tackled. And in this regard, we think it important that inflation expectation in the economies, including major economies and emerging market economies, inflation expectation to be anchored in a stable manner. So therefore, there needs to be some kind of monetary tightening as pursued in many economies.
Last month, APEC drew up 5 recommendations to develop the global economy and businesses. They are to be forwarded to the 21 members of APEC during the summit. The 5 proposals involve regional economic. A former British envoy, an Australian economic advisor, and a Japanese journalist flew to Thailand late Thursday after being freed by Myanmar's junta in an amnesty releasing 6,000 prisoners. Since a military coup last year, Myanmar has seen a bloody crackdown on dissent in which thousands of people have been jailed. Former British Ambassador Vicky Bauman, Australian economic advisor Sean Turnell, and Japanese journalist Toru Kubota touched down in Bangkok just after 7 o'clock p.m., according to an AFP reporter on their flight, who said they all appeared in good health. Bauman, who wore a traditional Burmese dress, did not comment as she was escorted by British Embassy staff through the airport to a connecting flight. U.S. Myanmar citizen Kyaw Tai O told AFP he was very happy. Kubota, who traveled on to Tokyo, told reporters upon landing early Friday morning that he wanted to express his gratitude for his release after spending 3.5 months in prison. 3 former ministers in Aung San Suu Kyi's government, including close confidants Ben Wu and lawyer Kyaw Ho, were among those released, as was NLD spokesperson Dr. Miu Mi. Bowman, who served as ambassador from 2002 to 2006, was detained with her husband in August for failing to declare she was living at an address different from the one listed on her foreigner's registration certificate. The couple were later jailed for a year. Her husband, prominent Myanmar artist Tin Lee, will also be released, the military said. But he was not on the flight to Bangkok, according to the AFP journalist. Australian Turnell was working as an advisor to Myanmar civilian leader Suu Kyi when he was detained shortly after the coup in February 2021. And as my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. This is Crystal Mapa reporting live from the APEC Leaders Summit here in Bangkok, Thailand, reminding you to stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times.